Thorne St. James stood in the lobby of the Ashford at 7:30 on a Monday morning, coffee in hand, pretending to check his phone while he waited for the right moment. The marble floor gleamed under the chandelier, and the morning light cut through the tall windows in sharp angles that made the whole space feel like something out of another era. Like stepping back into 1927, when men wore fedoras and women wore fur stoles, and the money that built places like this came with blood on it. James, the concierge, was alone at the desk, reviewing something on his computer screen. His posture was impeccable, spine straight, shoulders back, the kind of bearing that came from years of professional hospitality. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than Thorne made in a week, and his salt and pepper hair was styled with the precision of someone who understood that presentation mattered in a building like this. It had been 2 days since Thorne had heard Violette's conversation with her father through the walls. 2 days since he'd heard the exhaustion in her voice when she said she was tired of fighting, tired of never being enough. 2 days of thinking about the fact that he couldn't just keep listening and doing nothing, but he also couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The ethical weight of it sat in his chest like a stone. He'd revealed himself with that legal pad message on Saturday morning, standing in her doorway while she looked at him with those gray eyes that held so much intelligence and so much fatigue. She knew he'd left the note now. She knew he was the stranger who'd somehow known she needed those words, but she didn't know how he'd known. She didn't know about the walls, and if he told her, what then? Would she feel violated? Angry? Would she look at him the way his ex-wife Jennifer had looked at him toward the end? Like he was something broken that couldn't be fixed? Or would she understand that he'd never meant to invade her privacy, that it was just some impossible quirk of this old building that let him hear her life through 18 inches of plaster and brick? So he'd decided to start with the building itself. If he was going to understand what was happening in apartment 4B, maybe he needed to understand why he could hear it at all. Why his apartment, and only his apartment, seemed to have this impossible acoustic connection. Maybe there was something in the original construction, some flaw or feature in the ductwork that explained it. Maybe he could find answers that would help him figure out what to do next. He crossed to the desk. James looked up with a kind of polished smile that came from years of greeting residents and visitors. The smile that said, "Welcome," without revealing anything personal beneath it.
Good morning, Mr. St. James. How are you settling in?
Good, thanks. Still getting used to the place. It's a beautiful building.
One of the finest pre-war buildings in Manhattan. We're very proud of the Ashford's history.
Thorne leaned against the counter, casual, like this was just friendly conversation, like he didn't have an agenda. He took a sip of his coffee.
How long have you worked here?
5 years this spring. Not as long as some of the staff, but long enough to appreciate what makes this place special.
What does make it special? I mean, besides the obvious, the location, the park access, all that.
James seemed to consider the question. His expression shifted slightly, became more genuine, like he was moving past the professional script into something more personal.
The Ashford has character, real character, not the manufactured kind you get in new construction. This building was constructed in 1927, and it was built to last, built by people who understood craftsmanship. The marble you're standing on, imported from Italy, the chandeliers, original Baccarat crystal, the elevator cages, hand-forged ironwork. They don't make buildings like this anymore because nobody wants to spend the time or the money.
Thorne looked around the lobby with a new appreciation. He'd noticed the beauty of it when he first moved in, but he hadn't thought about the intentionality behind every detail. The crown molding that ran along the ceiling in elaborate patterns, the brass mailboxes set into the wall, each one engraved with an apartment number. The way the morning light hit the crystal chandelier and scattered rainbows across the marble floor.
1927. That's Prohibition-era, right?
It is. The original financing came from private investors, the kind of money that flowed freely in that particular period of American history, if you understand my meaning.
Thorne understood perfectly. Mob money, prohibition money, the kind of wealth that built half of Manhattan's landmarks and left bodies in its wake. speakeasies and smuggling routes and men in expensive suits who controlled the flow of illegal liquor through the city. The Ashford had been built with that money, constructed as a monument to wealth that couldn't be displayed openly but could be poured into real estate, into something tangible and permanent.
So the building's got some stories.
Every old building in this city has stories. The Ashford just happens to have particularly interesting ones. There are rumors, of course. Stories about what the building was used for during Prohibition. Some say there were private clubs in the basement, invitation-only gatherings where the right people could get the right drinks without worrying about the police. Some say there were hidden passages, ways to move alcohol through the building without being seen from the street.
Are the rumors true?
James smiled, and this time there was something knowing in it.
I couldn't say for certain. The building's ownership has changed hands several times over the decades, and records from that era can be incomplete. But I will say that the basement has some interesting architectural features that don't appear on the current floor plans.
Thorne filed that away. Incomplete records, hidden features. The more he learned about this building, the more it felt like a place designed to keep secrets.
I've noticed some quirks in my apartment. The ductwork, mainly. Sometimes I hear these echoes, like the building's settling in weird ways.
James's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe, or caution.
The old ductwork system is part of the building's original character. It can be temperamental, but that's the charm of pre-war construction. Each apartment has its own personality, its own quirks. Some residents hear the pipes clanging in winter when the heat kicks on. Some hear the wind in the ventilation shafts. It's all part of living in a building with nearly a century of history.
Have other tenants complained about sound traveling between apartments?
Not that I recall. The walls here are 18 inches of plaster and brick, solid as a bank vault. That's one of the selling points, actually, privacy and quiet in the middle of Manhattan. You could have a full orchestra playing in one apartment, and the neighbors wouldn't hear a thing.
He said it with confidence, with the certainty of someone who'd said it 100 times to prospective tenants. And he was probably right, for every apartment except 4A.
What about 4B, the apartment next to mine?
He tried to keep his voice neutral, but he saw James's eyes sharpen slightly, saw the subtle shift in his posture that suggested this question had registered as more than casual curiosity.
Ms. Westbrook's apartment? That's actually one of the special residences. When the building was originally designed, certain apartments were given premium features. 4B was one of them.
Premium features like what?
Larger windows, better sightlines to the park, custom millwork. The original owner had specific requirements. The apartment was designed to be distinctive, more luxurious than the standard units. I believe the master suite has hand-painted wallpaper from Paris, and the woodwork in the living room is all mahogany with inlaid mother-of-pearl details.
There was something in the way James said it. Not evasive exactly, but careful. Like he was choosing his words with precision, like there was more to the story that he wasn't saying.
Who was the original owner?
I'm not certain of the name. The buildings had several ownership changes over the decades. The original investors, the ones who financed the construction, were a consortium, anonymous benefactors, as they say. But certain apartments were designated for specific purposes, specific tenants. 4B was always meant to be special.
And who lives there now? Miss Westbrook, you said.
Yes, Violette Westbrook. She's been a resident for about 2 years. Very professional, very private. Works in her family's business. Westbrook International, the hotel group. I believe her father is Augustus Westbrook.
The Augustus Westbrook, the hotel magnate?
The same. Mr. Westbrook, Ms. Westbrook's father, purchased the property about 15 years ago as part of his real estate portfolio. He's been the building's owner since then.
Of course he did. Thorne filed that information away. Augustus Westbrook owned the building his daughter lived in. That felt significant, though he wasn't sure why. Was it normal for a billionaire to own the building where his adult daughter lived? Was it protective or controlling? Or just coincidence? Just another piece of real estate in a portfolio that probably included dozens of properties across Manhattan? But he remembered the conversation he'd heard 2 nights ago, Violette's voice, tight with frustration and exhaustion. "I'm tired, Dad. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of never being enough." And Augustus's response, cold and strategic, "Then stop fighting and start winning."
And 4A, my apartment. Anything special about that one?
James paused. For just a moment, his professional composure slipped, and Thorne saw something else underneath. Uncertainty, maybe, or something darker.
4A is the northwest corner unit. Good natural light. Quiet. The previous tenant was a physician, I believe, Dr. Emma Chen. She left rather suddenly about 6 months ago.
Left suddenly?
Abandoned her lease without much notice. Left some furniture behind, actually. The bed and the espresso machine in your apartment were hers.
Thorne nodded. He'd been using both since he moved in, grateful for the espresso machine especially, since good coffee was one of his few luxuries.
Did she say why she was leaving?
No, she was quite private. Kept to herself, worked long hours at the hospital. One day, she simply gave notice and was gone within the week.
Something about that didn't sit right. Thorne had moved into 4A just over 2 weeks ago, in early January. If Dr. Chen had left 6 months prior, in July, the apartment had sat empty for half a year. In a building like this, in a neighborhood like this, in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world. That seemed more than unusual. That seemed deliberate.
The apartment was vacant for 6 months before I moved in?
Mr. Westbrook can be selective about tenants. He prefers long-term residents who fit the character of the building. People who will appreciate what the Ashford represents, who will respect its history. He interviewed several potential tenants over those months, but none of them were quite right.
He interviewed them personally? The owner of the building?
For certain apartments, yes. 4A is one of them. Mr. Westbrook takes a personal interest in who lives on the 4th floor.
There it was again, Augustus Westbrook, who owned the building, who lived in Violette's life like a storm cloud, who apparently controlled who lived next door to his daughter, and Thorne had been approved personally, had been selected from what sounded like multiple applicants. Why? What had Augustus seen in him that made him the right tenant for 4A? Unless Augustus didn't know. Unless the property management company had handled it, and Augustus's personal interest was more theoretical than practical. But something told Thorne that wasn't the case. Men like Augustus Westbrook didn't leave things to chance. Thorne finished his coffee. He'd gotten more information than he'd expected, but he wasn't sure what it all meant yet. The pieces were there, but the picture was still unclear.
Well, I appreciate the history lesson. It's good to know I'm living in a piece of New York history.
The Ashford has seen a lot over the years. If those walls could talk, I imagine they'd have quite a few stories to tell.
Thorne felt a chill run down his spine. If James only knew. The walls in apartment 4A could talk, or at least they could listen, and they could carry sound in ways that shouldn't be possible. They could reveal secrets that were never meant to be shared. He nodded his thanks and headed toward the elevators. As he waited for the doors to open, he glanced back at the desk. James had returned to his computer, but there was something in his posture that suggested he was thinking about their conversation, turning it over in his mind. Maybe wondering why the new tenant in 4A was asking so many questions about the building's history, about 4B, about the previous tenant who'd left so suddenly. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Thorne stepped inside and pressed the button for the 4th floor. The doors closed and he was alone in the small space surrounded by polished brass and mirrors. He caught his reflection, tall, dark-haired, the scruff on his jaw making him look more tired than he felt. He looked like a man carrying a secret he didn't know what to do with, which he supposed was exactly what he was. When he reached his apartment, he locked the door behind him and stood in the silence. It was 8 in the morning. Violette would have left for work already. He'd heard her leave around 7, heard Vincent's car pull up to the curb, heard the building's front door close behind her. The apartment next door was empty now and wouldn't be occupied again until late tonight when she came home, exhausted and alone. He walked to the wall between their apartments. The wall that shouldn't carry sound but did. He pressed his palm against the plaster, feeling the coolness of it, the solidity. 18 inches of plaster and brick. Solid as a bank vault, James had said. And for 26 of the 27 apartments in this building, that was probably true. But not for 4A. Not for the northwest corner unit where some quirk of the original 1927 construction had created an acoustic anomaly that let him hear everything. Every conversation, every phone call, every moment of vulnerability that Violette thought was private. 4B was designed to be distinctive, James had said. Premium features, custom work, luxury beyond the standard units. But 4A? James hadn't said much about 4A at all. Just that it was quiet, that it had good light, that the previous tenant had left suddenly and the apartment had sat empty for 6 months, until Augustus Westbrook personally approved Thorne as the new tenant. Thorne pulled out his phone and opened a new note. He started typing. Building constructed 1927, Prohibition-era financing, mob money, rumors of private clubs in basement, hidden passages. Records from that era incomplete. 4B designed as special residence, premium features, always meant to be distinctive. Current resident Violette Westbrook, COO of family company. 4A Northwest Corner Unit, previous tenant Dr. Emma Chen, worked at Mount Sinai. Abandoned lease July 2025 after 3 years, left bed and espresso machine behind. Apartment vacant 6 months. Augustus Westbrook owns building purchased 15 years ago, personally approves tenants for 4th floor. He stared at the words. They felt like pieces of a puzzle, but he couldn't see the picture yet. He didn't know what he was looking for. What did any of this mean? Why did it matter that the building was constructed with mob money, or that 4B was designed to be special, or that Dr. Chen had disappeared so suddenly? Maybe it didn't mean anything. Maybe he was looking for patterns where none existed, trying to make sense of something that was just random chance. An old building with quirky acoustics, a woman next door who happened to be going through a difficult time, a previous tenant who'd gotten a job offer somewhere else and had to leave in a hurry. But his instincts told him different. Thorne had spent 15 years as an electrician, working in old buildings all over New York. He knew construction, knew architecture, knew the way buildings were put together. And nothing about the acoustic connection between 4A and 4B made sense. The walls were too thick. The apartments were too well insulated. Sound shouldn't travel like that, not in a building designed for privacy and luxury, unless it was intentional. Unless 4A had been designed specifically to hear what happened in 4B. But why? For what purpose? And if it was intentional, did that mean Dr. Chen had been listening too? Had she heard Violette's life through the walls for 3 years before she suddenly left? And if so, why had she left? What had she heard that made her abandon her lease and disappear? His phone buzzed in his hand, startling him out of his thoughts. A text from Margot. "How's the fancy building? Still listening to your mystery neighbor?" He sighed. Margot was the only person who knew about the walls, about what he could hear. She'd told him 2 weeks ago that he needed to make a choice, stop listening or actually meet Violette. He'd met her kind of, left her a note, revealed himself with a legal pad message 2 days ago. But he hadn't told Violette about the walls. He hadn't told her the real reason he knew she needed that note, and he didn't know if he ever could. Instead of texting back, he called her. She answered on the second ring.
"You actually called instead of texting. This must be serious."
I talked to the concierge this morning, asked about the building's history.
"And?"
The building was constructed in 1927 with prohibition money, mob money. There are rumors about hidden passages, private clubs in the basement, and the apartment next to mine, Violette's apartment, was designed to be special. Premium features, custom work. The concierge said it was always meant to be distinctive.
There was a pause on the other end of the line. He could hear background noise. The hospital, probably. Margot worked early shifts as a nurse, and she was probably on her break.
"T, what are you doing?"
I'm trying to understand why I can hear her. Why my apartment has this connection to hers.
Does it matter why?
Yes, it matters. Because if it's just some random quirk of old construction, then it's one thing. But if it was intentional, if 4A was designed to hear into 4B, then that changes everything.
Changes it how?
I don't know yet, but the previous tenant in my apartment left suddenly 6 months ago. Just abandoned her lease and disappeared. Left belongings behind, and the apartment sat empty until I moved in. And Augustus Westbrook, Violette's father, owns the building, and he personally approves tenants for the 4th floor.
Margot was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful.
You think he approved you specifically? For some reason?
I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just paranoid.
T, listen to me. You need to be careful. Whatever you're getting into, whatever this is, you need to think about what you're doing. You're investigating a building owned by a billionaire, asking questions about apartments and previous tenants and construction from 100 years ago. If Augustus Westbrook is as controlling as you say he is, do you really want to be on his radar?
She was right. He knew she was right, but he couldn't let it go.
I'm going to the Department of Buildings tomorrow. I'm going to request the original plans for the Ashford. I want to see the ductwork schematics, the ventilation systems. I want to understand how this is possible.
And if the plans don't show anything? If it really is just a quirk?
Then at least I'll know.
And if they do show something? If you find proof that your apartment was designed to listen to hers? Then what?
That was the question, wasn't it? Then what? Would he tell Violette? Would he confront Augustus? Would he move out and pretend he'd never heard anything?
I'll figure that out when I get there.
Margot sighed.
Just be careful, okay? And T? Maybe stop listening, at least until you know what you're dealing with. You're already in deep enough.
After they hung up, Thorne sat on his couch and stared at the wall. Stop listening. It sounded so simple when Margot said it. Just stop. Just walk away from the wall, put in earplugs, turn on music loud enough to drown out any sound from next door. But he couldn't. Because even though he knew it was wrong, even though he knew it was an invasion of Violette's privacy, he also couldn't shake the feeling that she needed someone to know that she was drowning in that apartment, surrounded by pressure and expectations and family dysfunction, and nobody saw it. Nobody heard it, except him. He had a job to get to, rewiring a townhouse in the West Village, a full day's work. But his mind was already somewhere else, on missing building plans and mob money, and a woman whose father owned the building she lived in, on 18-inch walls that weren't supposed to carry sound, and a physician who disappeared without explanation, on the fact that he was now investigating the very thing he should probably just walk away from. But he'd never been good at walking away. Not when something didn't make sense, not when someone needed help, even if she didn't know she needed it, even if she'd never asked. Thorne grabbed his tool bag and headed for the door. Tomorrow he'd go to the Department of Buildings. He'd request the original plans for 27 Gramercy Park South. He'd find out what made apartment 4A special. He needed to understand why he could hear her. Before he decided what to do about the fact that he couldn't stop listening.
Thanks for listening, and please subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
And for early access and bonus episodes, become a Patreon supporter today.